format. And tonight, Tara and I wanted to talk about internal representations. This week we taught, like last Thursday night, we were teaching submodality work and swish patterns. And some of the questions coming back in from that Thursday night class triggered me. And I was listening in. Tara was taking a course with the Andreas group on metaphors. And it triggered me to think of how significant internal representations are. And we teach them early in a prac course, but you know, the words we give to our internal representation is actually how we experience the world. It's not how we describe our world, it's actually how we experience them. And so tonight we want to talk about internal representation and what a pivotal role they play. And I think I'm really mind reading here, guys. I think that many practitioners learn it, you know, you learn IRs on the first day of a prac course. And then they're within the NLP model of communication, right? The IRs are in the middle of the NLP model of communication, but you're being hit with that fire hose of data on day one. And by day three, IRs, you know, you say it, but you may not actually connect to how powerful they are. And then when we're doing submodality work, I think that the possibility exists that shifting of IRs, the contrastive analysis and mapping across, the impact of that isn't fully appreciated. And so on a detail level, if you chunk down, if we just talk pure NLP language, if we're chunking down into Virginia Satir language, when we get into the IRs, you know, is it black and white or color? This is specificity, right? Is it brighter, dim, nearer, far, associated? This is detailed specificity. This is the epitome of meta model of Virginia Satir's work. However, on this weekend, Tara took a metaphors course, a metaphors of movement course, and she'll speak to it in a minute. But that is a massively chunked up concept, because when our IRs connect to our physiology to create our state, we create stories about our states, metaphors. And the metaphors are told in our language, which includes our primary representation system, right? We tell our metaphors in our primary representation system. I don't tell my metaphors in my non-primary representation system. I tell my metaphors in my primary representation system. And the metaphors can be empowering or constraining. So if you were to chunk way up, the chunked up part of IRs end up being in the stories we tell to describe our situation, and the chunked down ones are the submodalities, the SMDs, right? So this is chunked down and that's chunked up. So the course Tara was on this weekend was solving issues up here at a very chunked up level. And yet we do submodalities work, belief change. The belief change, original belief change in NLP was all done here, right? The original, you know, before timeline therapy, all the belief change was done down here at a very chunked down level in this moment in time. And so this is what we want to investigate here. This is what we want to talk about tonight. Tara's just getting up for a second. Oh, you can tell we're not both in the office, right? With the COVID lockdown, the 3 kids at home, it's crazy. I know you guys are probably going through the same thing. So Tara, just talk about the course at a high level, what the metaphor of movement course was, and then we'll start talking about in the middle here. You have no mic, T.
Yeah, okay. I just have Tessa here with me. She's, so I turn the light on. You can still see me okay though? Yeah. Yep. Yeah, so this was a course that I've long been interested in. Mark Andreas teaches it. And the idea of metaphors is exactly as you would imagine, right? It's the idea of whenever somebody has a situation and you ask them to illustrate how they experience the situation, they can very, very easily come up with a metaphor. So you hear people say it all the time, right? They'll say things like, you know, it just feels like it was a kick in the gut, or, you know, I feel like I have 1,000 pounds on my shoulders, or, you know, they give all sorts of metaphors about it. And so it's just an expansion of that. So what we learned to do, and what I've actually been doing a little while, because I read the material before I took the course, is to expand the metaphor and actually turn it into a thing. a drawable, talk aboutable thing. And so when people start getting into the metaphor, so if somebody were to say something like, I just feel like I'm in this bottomless pit, I just am free falling, you would just sort of pause them there and say, okay, you know what, I actually want you to hold on to that idea and tell me about that experience. And then you get them to look around. So what's beautiful, of course, about the unconscious mind and the imagination is that it's always there. It's always happening. It's just that usually our conscious awareness isn't paying attention to it. And so what comes out is a pretty clear description of, what's to your right, what's to your left, what's in front of you, what's behind you. And as you notice those things, the unconscious mind is giving you all sorts of data to work with, right? So without getting into the whole training and everything else, what it really demonstrates is how powerful these internal representations are. Because what comes to light is things like, if you're coaching somebody and you're really working on, clearing limiting beliefs and working with negative emotions and clearing their trauma and all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, when they describe the situation, they feel as though they walk, when they walk toward the horizon, that it just keeps staying as far away from them, just stays perpetually out into the future, far, far, far away, unattainable. And that may not come out in a set of beliefs or a specific trauma or anything else. And without knowing that, if you're not aware of how that's how that they're experiencing that particular, event or moment or thought or belief or whatever else it is, you may not understand why it's so difficult to get traction on it. And they may not understand because they're not aware of how that internal representation is going on. And so it's just a really, really useful tool. I just want to mention what made this so, Dan, have you done the training?
Well, I have not done that training, but I'm more, oops, I have an echo, sorry. I talked to them about clean language because that's kind of like the other form of working with metaphors. And I have to admit that what I liked about clean language is that you actually are hands off. You don't direct them to any direction whatsoever. You just use a very specific set of language and questions in a very specific order, and there is kind of like a methodology to the question that they explore their own metaphoric landscape. So that's pretty much what I use.
Was your impression that, because they actually don't, I was actually surprised that there is no changing of the metaphor at all, that toward the very, very end, after you explore the metaphor, you may suggest at the very end that they want to attempt to see what it's like walking around within the metaphor, or to possibly see what it would be like to grow up if they're very small, or to sit down if they're unstable or something like that. But they're only suggestions, and they only come at the very, very end, which was really interesting because I thought that it was more solution-based, and it's not actually, right? It's not at all solution-based. Anyway, okay, yeah, it's interesting. What I thought was most interesting and what drew me to this work so much is that working in NLP as long as we have now, people's internal representations are always available. And I have gotten into the habit as a practitioner to just stop whenever I feel like there's a lot of energy around something. So whether it's a place in this person's life, whether it's a person, whether it's a concept, as soon as I stop, and this is outside of metaphors for movement now, this is just in my own practice as a practitioner, is that if I stop and ask the internal representation. So my example is, if I feel as though I don't want to do something, so some of you may have heard me talk about this before, but if I say to, Al and I are driving home on a Sunday, and Al says, hey, do you want to stop? We have a few hours of work to do. Do you want to stop and do it at the office, or do you want to do it at home? And I immediately, in this case, answered, I want to do it at home. And yeah, cool. Thank you. Thank you, Dan. I have heard of it. I'm interested. Anyway, so my response is, yeah, I want to go work at home. which doesn't actually work very well, right? Because our files and everything are at the office. It's, it's actually, it'll be more efficient. It's actually going to go better if we do it at the office. But if that went unchecked, I would have just said, let's go home. But when I stop for a second and say, okay, why was I just drawn that way? And in this example, it doesn't matter a whole lot one way or the other. But if I check that IR, so in that example, if I say, okay, well, what is my internal representation right now of the office? So when I say the word office, just like every single thing in our entire lives, there is a picture in my mind with associated meaning, beliefs, ideas, and everything else, an internal representation in my mind of the office. And if I don't pay attention to that, it's going to have an impact and an influence on how I think and how I feel and how I make decisions and everything else. And so in that one, what I checked out was, okay, what's my internal representation? And when I checked out the internal representation, I realized one of the qualities of the internal representation of the office is that it's cold. And I didn't want to be cold. So it was this really interesting thing where like, wait a minute, I actually own this office. I can just turn up the heat, right? Like it doesn't have to be cold. I can go turn the heat up. And then we'll be able to stop at the office and it will just be more efficient and it will take less time and we can get back to our family on a Sunday. But if I didn't let that go unchecked, right? If I did let that go unchecked, the number of times that we're drawn into decisions, not realizing that our internal representations are contributing to decisions that aren't necessarily in our best interest or getting us where we want to go. And that's a mild little micro example, but think about how you have an internal representation of the people that you love, the people that you don't love, the things that are most important to you. And if you slow those down and start looking at internal representations, you may be very, very surprised at how much more control, right? So in my head, I just recognize that like, right, okay, I can actually turn the heat up, change that internal representation, and my decisions now can be based on what is actually going to be more effective and efficient, as opposed to just the feeling that I was getting cold. Nobody, I don't know, maybe you guys like to be cold, but I just don't like to be cold more so than other things, right? So I'll stop talking, but that was what really drew me into this work, is realizing that so often, rather than getting complicated in all of the tools and the techniques, if I just stop and say to a client, you know what, you've said that word or that you've referenced this thing a number of times, and there seems to be a lot of energy around it or not. What do you see in your head right now when you say that word? Get the internal representation and just use it as data. Notice what you notice about it and know that it's changeable.
And when people talk about their internal, when we sense something and they have an internal representation, remember that they've eliminated most of the information about their world when they allowed the internal representation to come in and to give it meaning. Right? We're deleting the preponderance of information around us. Our delete filters are reducing the fire hose down to somewhere around 134 bits per second. And then we're making decisions. So Tara's decision that the office wasn't a pleasant place to work was based on a limited amount of information. When she opened up, when she actually examined it and it challenged her IRs, which were based on a temperature, it shifted everything. And that's the same with clients. So what you will find is that when you listen to Tara or I work, we'll do things like SMDs seamlessly in the moment. And we'll do them before a technique, after a technique, in the middle of the technique. Doesn't matter. They don't alter the flow of anything. If we find something of importance, and as Tara said, it's just data or data, we get the SMDs and we park them because we might use that later. It also is a great tool when you have a client who finds difficulty doing one of the tasks you do, and you get the IRs for that, and then get the IRs for a task that they find easy to do, and you just map them across. It's super effective in knocking down resistance. And so the IRs that we have, I think we have, I like to go back, I'm suggesting what I do, and what Tara, I know what Tara does, is go back and we remind ourselves that those internal representations that combine with our physiology to create our state are based on a minuscule amount of data And that the data that gets in, those three filters, delete, distort, and generalize, are fluid based on our emotional state. I would say that the fallacy in the model, in the communication model, is when IR connects to physiology to create your emotional state, it impacts the filters. So the external world, when you're triggered and you get angry, your delete filter goes up and it only lets information through that corroborates with you being angry. And now the internal representation. So I think the fallacy is that it's in and out, and I don't think so. I think there's a circular path that goes in, and affects your filters, and then that lets in. And that's where we lead to the concept of the pattern interrupt. We interrupt the emotional pattern. When we interrupt the emotional pattern, we impact the filters. When we impact the filters, now we experience our world as different. We start to hear and see and feel differently. So some of the most subtle, some of the most simple techniques of NLP, that's why they have some of the massive impact they have. Because when you do a pattern interrupt, when you do a squirrel, right? You're changing the filters. When you're changing the filters, then you change what gets into your IR and what combines with your physiology to create your emotional state. And so, if you think of this abstract to detail, metaphors are up at the abstract. We're telling a story that's not absolutely representative. You know, when you ask somebody, how are you doing today? And they say, I feel like I can fly, as their metaphor for their opportunity that day. That is very abstract about where they are in their life, right? You have to agree that's a very abstract metaphor. But if we ask them, so as you think about flying, can you get a picture? And we get the submodalities. We're down here in the detail. We've chunked way down. And VAK, the standard visual auditory kinesthetic, is sort of a mid-level chunk. So if you say, are you seeing the image, hearing the image, or feeling this? So I feel like I can fly. Okay, well, that's a mid-level chunk. The metaphor I can fly is a massively abstract chunk if you ask for the submodalities. And the beauty is, I think, and I think the gift or the skill to work on as an NLP practitioner or coach is to be able to move fluidly from detail to abstract, and from abstract back into detail, to not only match the client, but also to pace and lead the client. Because if a client's stuck in detail or stuck in their metaphor, you might be able to move them at that level. You might have to go down in chunk size like Virginia Satir would have done, or down into the detail. Or if they're stuck in the detail, you might have to move them up and use metaphors as Milton Erickson did. But it's all based on this IR and the impact the IR is having when it connects to our physiology. And I think, you know, we teach NLP in a fairly linear way, especially at PRAC. You know, we have these little building blocks that start, and the first 2 days are building blocks, and then all of a sudden we start launching into techniques. And again, I use the excuse of time, but we don't really have time to connect all the theory in the structure to the technique so that the practitioner actually knows what they're doing, right? Or why what they're doing works so well, right? So when you start to understand what's happening in this dynamic, that actually allows you to be more fluid, right? And I think one of the calls that Tara and I get regularly, especially from new coaches and some medium coaches, are fear-based questions. They're afraid of violating the context, the model, the flow. The did I do it right question, or is it okay to do this? And I would suggest to you that the more you get into and you understand the fundamentals, the model, the more you realize if your intent is good, you can literally do no harm. If you're responding and moving with the client and your intent is to move the client to a better place all the time, your fluidity can do no harm. So there is no, did I do it right? If you're doing the technique with the understanding of how it actually works. I've got one eye on the questions over here for a second.
Yeah. I was just gonna, Paul, I have a really good example of that. So everyone saw Paul's question there. So you're saying, do people have to actually be able to see the picture? So some of you may have already experienced or not, that some clients will actually say that they can't see pictures in their head, that they can't see things. So this is where the everyone can see something in their head. There is nobody who can't see anything in their head. Otherwise, they wouldn't be able to recognize their loved ones. They wouldn't be able to recognize their own home. They wouldn't be, I mean, they wouldn't be able to recognize anything around them if they didn't have pictures. It's a matter of access. So
It'd be a lot of fun though. Just go to any house.
yeah,
This looks like home.
but you have to have visual retention in order to be able to navigate as a human being. What the unwillingness or the inability or the, you know, whatever it is that's driving their inability or their feeling that they can't see things, there's lots of ways around that. So what's really interesting is that you can, you know, you can tell anybody on the planet, you can say, okay, look at the wall in front of you, look at the room you're in. Now close your eyes and see the room that you're in. Anyone can do that. Nobody's going to like see the lamp in front of them. And then when you say close your eyes, what does the lamp look like? That they're going to be like, I have no idea. I can't see it anymore. You know what I mean? They can still see it. They can still access that in that moment. It doesn't mean that you can necessarily just, you know, force them to be able to then create a picture of, you know, when you were 15 and you had a car, what, you know, can you get a picture? But it does often allow them to recognize what they're looking for. Like it just, you have to sort of teach them how to be able to see the things in their heads. When you say to somebody, what does the Eiffel Tower look like? They can draw it, they can describe it, right? So they can see it. And they don't need to have to be able to like hold a picture and sustain it. They just have to have access to it. So I think what people get really confused with is they think that they're supposed to be like looking at an image as if they're looking at a photograph, you know, and that it's just sitting there in their mind. And some people are lucky enough to be able to do that. I certainly can't. There's not a chance. If somebody says, close your eyes and see a dog, I'll see it, but then it will start like, you know, flickering and changing, and then I can't sort of catch it, whatever, but it's there. It's there enough that if somebody said, well, is it in black and white? I can check and I know that it's in color and I can see, right? So I think people just really need a lot of help in understanding what that means. And you can usually do it with really familiar things, bringing familiar things in and out of their awareness in their mind. And then when you say something like, you know, so when you feel afraid and you see, you know, or can you get a picture of when you feel afraid? Because Paul, I want to tell you something, or all of you, I want to tell you something really interesting. I had a girl that I was just recently working with who had to show up in court and face her attacker from many years ago. She was sexually assaulted and attacked by this man, and she's now in court yesterday and today. And so we did the trauma work and we did the other work, and I had her anticipating. So internal representations, when you are anticipating anything in your life, internal representations are so powerful, right? Especially when it's very physical, like when, well, anything. So this girl had, we did the work. So we did, you know, she didn't believe that she was going to be able to sit there and tell her story without breaking down. So we did all sorts of work around that. And then, so we finally get to it and she feels really, really much stronger. Okay, so she's still stronger. She really feels like, okay, now she can breathe. I've got her, she doesn't jump around and shake anymore. And she's actually not hyperventilating when she tells the story. And so we've got her in like this really, really, really pretty good place. But she keeps saying, but I still feel really nervous. I still feel like the prosecution or the, what do you call the other lawyer? The mean lawyer.
Defense lawyer.
Right. I still feel like that's going to be so hard, and she would start to get sweaty and nervous and everything else. Oh, I checked IRs on that one because I had done the belief work. Like we weren't going to, in the amount of time that we had, I didn't have a lot of, she only came to me like a week and a bit before this trial. So I didn't have a lot of time. And so when I check the IRs on, okay, when you're sitting there, she's already been in a pre-trial, so she knows exactly the setting she's going to be in and everything. When you see yourself sitting there and you see him, so that most of you, all of you, are familiar with aligning perceptual positions. So remember what we learned about that is like, even though you're You may have some resolution on a relationship. All of a sudden you realize that whenever you think about that relationship, one person's gigantic and you're, the other person's small or something like that. And so when I checked the IRs on her sitting there and the defense lawyer, guess what I found out, right? So even despite her image of herself had gotten much, much better, she was stronger, she was sitting there, but guess what her internal representation of the defense lawyer was? It was like this gigantic man that was towering over her, that had this booming voice, that was staring at her with this like penetrating accusatory look, trying to, like, it was just this nasty IR once we actually looked at it, right? So the work that we were doing was helpful, but that internal representation, I don't consider it a shortcut to be able to work with that IR. Whether or not, if I continued to do beliefs, maybe if I had spent 2 weeks just working on beliefs and, doing all of the timeline work and all of the other NLP work and everything, would that have changed just organically, naturally? I don't know, maybe. But I know that we can also just go into that IR, get him down to size, right? Change that internal representation. And all of a sudden, all the work that we did on her own strength had a whole lot more power, right? And she didn't know that. Like, she would not have known that she was walking into a courtroom with this like monster IR in her head that had her 5 times more freaked out than she needed to be, right? So there's so many ways. As soon as people are anticipating anything, Dan, I don't mean to focus on you tonight, but I would be really interested when people anticipate pain or anticipate their migraine or anticipate, right? Like that, I bet you that anticipation is feeding the actual experience so much, right?
18. Let me cycle back to Paul for a minute. Our mentor, Tad James, always said when a client says they can't do something, they can do the process of not. So when a person says they can't get a picture, well, when you can do the process of not getting the picture, what are you doing? And they'll probably be in an auditory digital or some other form in their head, not doing what you're asking them to do. As Tara said, all of us have images. And I always remember that because Tad is like Bandler was a bit flippant when he taught, but it's become a powerful frame for me. I actually did it, I think, on a Tuesday night or on Thursday night with the group. Somebody said, I can't do that. And I said, well, you can't do that process of not doing it, why don't you do this? And they did it right away. So I just flipped it on them almost like in a hypnotic pattern. And again, so clients who say that they can't do something are actually doing something. You can't, there I go, I just did it. Well, what's the metaphor you use, Tara? When somebody says, I didn't do the vacuuming, well, they did something. What did you do instead, right? You can't focus on the thing they didn't do, or you can't focus on the thing they can't do. You need to focus, what did you do instead?
So there's no such thing as not vacuuming. Not vacuuming is not a thing.
And there's no such thing as not getting a visual image. They did something instead of doing what you ask. And that's often indicative of rapport or following your instructions as well, potentially, right?
I just want to answer these.
Yeah, exactly. I want to jump in for a sec, though, T, on the IRs. I know a guy who worked in the prison system, working with people with anger management. And when he cleared all the stuff that led to the anger management, he worked on IRs because some of the triggers of the people when he would lose when they would lose their temper were in the IRs, their internal representations of others. And the IRs were affected by these filters, the DDG filters, right? The IRs of people. So he would do a lot of IR work. He would also do a lot of perceptual position alignment, because that is a rehearsal. When you do perceptual position alignment, so when we change IRs, we're changing IRs in this moment. That has an immediate effect. When we're doing anything like perceptual position alignment or future pacing, we're actually giving our brain an opportunity to see other possibilities. And this segues into Lisa Feldman Barrett's work again. I'm a fan of hers. So, we're impacting the brain differently, but the individual techniques coming together create an exponential effect, right? And that's what Tara's client had she changed her IR and the defense lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah, so I didn't actually map it across to anything. I simply changed the IRs to where her kinesthetic actually moved into a place where I knew she was calm. So what I did know from her, I had already elicited from her kinesthetic. So I knew the difference between when she was, anticipatory, when she was cautious, when she was scared, when she was calm, when she was happy. So I knew her K. So I just actually had her change the internal representation until she actually felt absolutely calm while she saw the internal representation of her answering the defense lawyer's questions.
Perceptual position alignment is actually submodality mapping across and contrasting analysis. When you look at it, you're changing the location, which are potential drivers. You're changing size, or you're changing volume. You're changing location of sounds and sights. So it is actually a very elegant, advanced form of submodality, contrastive analysis, and mapping across.
Yeah.
So in that technique, Tara's client had radical submodality shifts of her lawyer, and when you can take the third party perspective, think about the filters now. When you step out of being associated, become dissociated in the third person, what filters are you running? Your delete, your distort, your generalize totally changed. That's one of the beauties of going to the three positions, is you're actually engaging three different sets of filters: delete, distort, and generalize filters. Again, when you understand the nuances of what's happening when you do these techniques, no wonder they have such a massive impact.
Mapping across, guys, is when you're going for certainty of a specific outcome, right? So what you're going for is for somebody to shift from doubt to certainty, then you actually map it across into something that you already know to be certain, it's just a target, right? Just gives you a target, but that it's only a tool. Like it's just a way to use submodalities and changing internal representations. You don't need to be mapping across to anything if what you're aiming for is just to shift the IR until it gets to something that is going to be better serving to the person. I just want to address Dan's question here. Could you have done the timeline anxiety process 15 minutes after the future? So you guys all know that 15 minutes, or most of you know, 15 minutes after the successful completion of the event. I did that with her probably on like 3 or 4 times in every session I saw her, and on every step. So I would actually run the anxiety model on the day before, keeping herself calm and just like having a bath and all that kind of stuff, the successful completion of that day. I ran the anxiety model on getting to the courtroom, just being able to like be there to begin that day calm after the successful completion of being able to get there, staying together. I ran it on the whole thing. I ran it on the second day. She actually called me I talked to her in the morning. I ran it again with her. She called me at the break at lunch. So she did the morning, she kept it together. She called me at the break at lunch. I ran the anxiety model with her again. She went out to her car and I ran it on for the afternoon. So yeah, no, I mean, I run that. I taught her how to do it herself. And today she had to go back in court, and I wasn't able to talk to her this morning. So she was able to do it herself. I used that anxiety model, and it just like made all, and peripheral vision, guys. She just kept going into peripheral vision, and between peripheral vision and she had a visual anchor, like a color inside her body, color anchor, and running the anxiety model, and she was able to get through the process.
The anxiety model, to be really simplistic, the anxiety model is just future pacing, right? We use it, we call it the anxiety model, but you can future pace anything using that model. You can set your intention for the day and just future pace out the outcome.
So long as you make sure you get after a successful completion and look back.
Yeah, but you can future pace anything. It doesn't have to be something you're anxious about. You can just future all things if you want. We use it was designed for it. It has amazing impact on anxiety, but it is a future pacing activity.
Yeah.
You're hesitant, or you want to argue that it's not a future pacing activity? Did I hear that in your?
No, I was just going to repeat myself, and then I realized I sounded like a broken record. I was just you can use it on anything, and I use it as a tag on to everything, as opposed to a standalone technique ever. It just basically anything anyone has any negative anything about, I will always take the extra 30 seconds and run the anxiety model.
And let's look at tagging on then. Here's a cool thing to tag on. Whenever you've made massive change with a person and they get to a new state, if you get the submodalities for that new state, move it into a state that's absolutely true, map it across. Now you lock it into the change that they've just got is an absolute, something that's absolute. So you finish it with an IR change. Tara started doing that when she was doing timeline therapy, limiting decision, limiting beliefs. And as she came back to now, at the end of it, she just take that new belief and move it into something that's absolutely true for that person. And that just locks it in the same IRs, right? If you do belief change and the IRs of the new belief are sort of partway to absolutely true, they're sort of still in the questioning IRs. But if you move it all the way over here to absolutely true and you lock it in, and then if you anchor it, and then if you use the anxiety model or future pace it, now it's a lock, now it's a done deal. And that's just, as Tara said, it's just a continuous, a seamless transition of technique to technique to technique.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, Laura, go rock 'em. Did she already leave? Off to her next meeting. See you later. Okay, yeah, I guess it's 5 o'clock there. Have fun.
Mm-hmm.
I forgot to say Tanya's on the West Coast too. Is Tanya still with us?
And Kathy was here. Where did Kathy go? Did you see Kathy Leggett was in here, but she left.
Oh, cool. Florida. Wow. A lot of fun.
Yeah. I would also, while we're talking about it, might as well mention this, and then we'll open it up to questions, guys. Anything you've got. And it doesn't have to be about IRs, just whatever. But I just worked with a client this afternoon, and she's having potentially a mental breakdown. Not entirely sure what's going on, but she's losing her stuff basically, and not sure what's going on, and it's a very confusing situation. But I've been working with her a little bit, and I can tell that things are changing. And using IRs with her, she was literally too freaked out today. She was just like, it was over Zoom, which is always a little harder when people are really freaking out, when you can't control any of the space, like physically, right? So she was like pacing around a room and just like, she couldn't stay still. I couldn't keep her on the camera. So it was difficult. Took a lot of energy and work, to sort of try and get her closed. So I actually used some wholeness. The only thing I could do, because as soon as she heard any words associated with anything that she was dealing with, she would just lose her stuff again and start crying and start, freaking out. And so the wholeness work allowed me to get her completely away from the content, like 100% away from the content. So those of you that don't know wholeness, we work just with like feelings, shapes, colors, absolutely no interpretation linguistically or meanings or anything at all. We just work with the color and the shape and the temperature and everything else. And that allowed me to finally get her calmed down. But she just wasn't in a state that I was going to be able to keep her on her timeline or do any of that kind of work. So I worked with IRs because she needed to feel 100% in control in this session. She was not going to get to a place where she was going to be able to just like relax and go in. She'd just come out of this. It was crazy. So what I could work with was IRs, because it lets the person maintain control 100% of the time, right? You're not asking them to trust you. You're not asking them to close their eyes. You're not asking them to go anywhere unknown, right? There's nothing except their own control over this, process that you're suggesting that they could get a picture. And then once she was able to get the picture, so I just used IRs, just exactly what you guys have learned, the what used to be true and isn't true, and the certainty one. And so I was able to get her to get an image of herself with all this like self-loathing and all this stuff. And I was able to get really easily able to get the IRs from this picture of her self-loathing sort of self. And then managed to get what used to be true and isn't true, and mapped that across, and it actually went really easily across. It was no trouble getting that to move over there, because it was a relief, right? It actually, as soon as she started to move the picture and what used to be true that was no longer true, she didn't realize consciously what was happening. And she fought with me for quite a while. She didn't want to do any work today and all that stuff. But when it moved across, what she felt was that relief of it not having to be like all around her anymore, right? So she moved it away and she got this like, and I could see that it was giving her relief. And then when we created a picture of her, we just turned her into a like, nope, you're just a hero on a journey and you're doing the bravest thing, you know, the most courageous thing in the world you can do is stay focused on yourself and really working this out and facing the difficulties and the challenging, and you're proud of yourself and you're courageous and everything else. And we got that picture and moved that into certainty. And I was able to get both, and she never had to give up control, right, of anything. And when we got it there, she finally started like smiling, right? So first it was this like relief of getting that agony away from her. And then it actually was able to move into this like, yeah, I am doing a hard thing and this is hard. But it went from like panic and terror to hard and proud. And that was all through IR shifting. And I don't think I would have had success any other way. That's all I'm saying.
So T, we've got a bunch of questions here that have come in the recent weeks, and what you just said answered some of those questions. People, when you're doing submodality work, right, you elicit the submodalities of two states. And if you want, if you're mapping and 1 into 2, let's say these are the drivers and you map 1 into 2. One of the questions we've been getting, do you map the kinesthetic 1 into 2? And actually you don't have to, because remember, when you change the submodalities, the visual and auditory submodalities of any internal representation, the person experiences that internal representation through feelings differently. So the check is, if this mapping across, if mapping 1 into 2 was effective, now when they think about 1, they will get this kinesthetic. So if 1 has been mapped into 2 accurately, the person, when you ask them to think about 1, will now get this new kinesthetic. They will no longer get this kinesthetic. So the kinesthetic is actually the test of the veracity of your elicitation, contrastive analysis, and mapping across. So Tara just said it so brilliantly there. When she mapped the one into 2 and 2 into 3, she saw the emotional change, and the person energetically shifted, right? They went into this new calm energy here. So again, when you do a great mapping across, you have a kinesthetic shift. You don't have to map the kinesthetic across. It is evidence that you did it right. All right. Same, the like to dislike is the clearest one on that. You know, you map the food groups across here, and then the person has the gag reflex. When you give them the ice cream, they now have the gag reflex. Mm-hmm. Kate, you had a question?
Few times you mentioned if you do a great mapping across. What did you mean by great?
Well, I find people get confused about drivers, right? We teach that the biggest drivers, of course, are location, black and white or color, associated, dissociated, but we also say that the drivers can be auditory. I've seen a lot of clinicians just focus on the visual, and like literally one IR will have no auditory, the other one will have lots of auditory, or the position of the auditory. You know, the sounds are all here on one, and they're here on the other, and these are moving away from, and these are moving towards. Those are significant, right? So a great one is you look at those drivers. They are the difference that make the difference. And you move those. And with your sensory acuity, when you're shifting them, you should start seeing a change, right? Just the shifting, especially location. And the location, we did one the other night on class, and the location was from here, it dropped down slightly, like 6 inches. And it went from a 3-dimensional image to a flat image. Now that doesn't sound like a lot, but to me that was significant, because the position changed, but the dimensionality of the image changed. To me, that's significant. And when we moved those there to there, it was a like to dislike, it was a gag reflex right away. When we tested it, it was a gag reflex. So that's what I mean by when you do a mapping across, when you're really intuitive to what are the things that need to be mapped. Oops.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
Is that good? Simone, I thought Simone, and now she's gone. There she is. Hi.
Yeah. Hi. Hi, everybody. I have a client coming up who has a wicked gag reflex when she tries to take any supplements or pills. So, I mean, my thought is submodality, but I'm thinking there's probably some emotion around connected to something. She thinks she has to chew everything that's in her mouth, even something that's very, very tiny. So, my thoughts are sort of timeline therapy, shifting those big emotions, submodality. Shifting. What are your thoughts? She's
Well,
not taking.
My first thought is, you know, if you actually did a submodality shift, you'd be shifting a dislike to a like, which is a no-no.
Mm-hmm.
So
Oh,
that's my immediate thought. So I'm going to ask a Steve Andreas question. Where were you when you decided you couldn't swallow vitamins?
Okay.
And she said, when I was 6, and then I go right into the timeline therapy. Boom. I wouldn't hesitate.
And then Simone, I had a similar, I think it feels similar or seems similar to me. Twice I've worked with people who have phobias of throwing up, like they're either themselves or other people. So it's very visceral in that same way. Like it's just, you know, it's that sort of, and once I got it just with a, you know, belief change and that kind of thing. Once I actually ran the trauma model on it, like actually ran the trauma model on throwing up, and it worked beautifully. This was a, it was a bit, you know, it was probably a phobia. And I would say that being unable, if she is legitimately unable to swallow a pill, that's a phobia, right? That is a fear, an inappropriate fear that is debilitating, right? It's just like somebody not being able to step on an airplane, you know. So I wouldn't hesitate to. There's no harm, can't do any harm in doing the phobia model, like in the, you know, the trauma model, phobia model, and won't do anything but potentially help.
Yeah, and I found very recently I worked with somebody who when we did timeline, he said there was he had significant emotional events but no trauma. And even though, but we couldn't loosen up one of the significant emotional, I finally said, scrap it. I'm going to do the trauma model on him, and it cleared. It was beautiful. And I was like,
Yeah,
I just want to do everybody now. That's like easy.
I think one of the misdirects in NLP is, like, we call the anxiety model, call the trauma model a trauma model.
Yeah.
You know, as soon as I tell somebody I'm going to do the trauma model, I'm going to go, I'm not traumatized. Okay,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm just going to do another technique here, right? And
Yeah.
you do, and boom, you get the results you get.
And I know I was a little traumatized by the trauma model, feeling very, very responsible, not wanting to trigger something. I want to be very, you know, concerned and specific and careful with it. It took me a long time to start practicing it. I really wanted to go gently with it. And once I've started using it, I was like, wow, people are shocked. They can't believe the change.
Yeah.
One of these nights, I'm going to just discuss the control aspects of the trauma model, why it's so psychologically empowering, and just parse it out for people. For people who have, like your gag reflex client or the client Tara had, who have no control over those events. And they probably actually, if you have a phobia or trauma, you're replaying vomiting or gagging over and over and over again in your mind. The trauma model introduces layers of control where they take control, where they have psychological control. Yeah. And the evidence procedure that they have control happens in real time in about 6 or 7 different locations in that trauma model. Again, why the technique works is as fascinating to me at this juncture of my career as doing the technique. And so one night I'll parse that all out, and you'll be amazed at the number of places there's control for them.
Yeah. And when you think about anything like that pill swallowing is something, you know that what's going through her mind is just, there's no beginning, middle, end. It just loops and loops and loops. It's just this ongoing, you know, thing that she's afraid of, right? And anything that you identify as being like that, I've been the, you know, I've had people, we've trained so many people that I've been the object of doing the trauma model without having any trauma to work on. Yeah. So it's fun because I've actually had it done, you know, Al's done it on me on just events that are sort of like a little embarrassing, or, you know, and I've still found sometimes it's neither here nor there. It's like, oh, okay, that's, you know, interesting. But there's one in particular that was certainly not trauma, not by any stretch, but it was a super shit, you know, event in my high school where I thought the entire school had seen me be like humiliated. And my memory of it, I realized, was like 100 people watching me be totally humiliated, all that kind of stuff. Ran the trauma model on it and realized by the end of it, it was like, oh, there was like 6 people there. And I realized that there were actually like all sorts of people just walking down the hall, not even noticing, not even looking, you know what I mean? And so it was actually really cool. That technique allowed me to have a completely different perspective and experience on this event in my life. And so I think that probably was the one that allowed me to realize, you know, if you suspect it may be, there's no harm, right? It takes you 8 minutes to do it.
Well, that's what I've been doing the last couple of weeks for sure. So thank you for that. And Alan, your comment about, you know, understanding what's happening sort of behind the scenes also interests me a lot. And I'm having a bit of difficulty trying to find, I mean, yes, I can, you know, read a lot about the techniques and how they do it, but trying to understand what's actually happening behind the scenes is important for me also. And so I don't know if there's any places or suggestions you have for links or anything else, or.
Well, you're not going to find it in a way where they say, okay, here is the NLP technique and here's why it works. That just doesn't exist. All right. First, let that go. What you have to do is read books. The starting point for me, he is I love listening to him, is Robert Sapolsky. If you listen to Robert Sapolsky, buy the book, 700 pages, make it your next book, 10 pages a day, 2 months. And when you get Robert Sapolsky's book and you go through it, you're going to start picking out NLP, why NLP works. The next, that's called Behave, right? It's called Behave. And Robert Sapolsky's book. And the next book I would highly recommend is Lisa Feldman Barrett, How Emotions Are Made. You wade through that 1,000 pages, those 2 books, and you'll probably, if you link what they're talking about to NLP techniques, you'll probably be in the top 10% of NLP purveyors.
Can you just package that for me, please?
If I can do what?
Could you just package that for me, please?
And then if you want to really learn about the power of anchoring, positive and negative, the book is Capture. The book is Capture, and the subtitle is Unraveling the Mysteries of Mental Illness by Dr. David Kessler. And he talks about stimuli becoming salient. So they stand out bigger than all other stimuli, and they get connected to other stimuli, and they fire neurological pathways to negative emotional states. And they talk about it being so profound that people who are really stuck can't even remember being happy or imagine being happy. And that's our clients, right? So those 3 books, if you read them with a mind to, okay, I do NLP, what is he talking about? And Sapolsky talks about the first second, the first minute, the first hour, the first day of our behavior, right? It's a beautiful book, and he is hilarious, actually. He's quite funny. And then Lisa Feldman Barrett has a TED Talk and her book. And then Kessler's book is a bit dark. I wouldn't read too much of it in any one burst, because he doesn't talk about how to access positive emotional states in it. He just talks about how people get sucked into the negative vortice. But when you read it and you start thinking about your clients, you're going to see and hear and feel so much in it. Yeah, Lindy, you're right. The biology of humans at our best and worst.
Can I jump in here? I want to say this before I forget and before people start having to go. We are putting together, by request, we're putting together a practice group. So Saturday mornings, starting probably not, well, why not this one? We're going to do it from
9 to 11.
9 to 11. So from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. We're not going to do anything there. We're not going to teach. We're not going to be, specifically doing anything. What we're going to do is we're going to have a Zoom room. So a phone number and a Zoom room that you guys can call in, and whoever shows up can pair off into breakout rooms and just practice techniques. So we're going to leave it like open door. So if you happen to wake up on a Saturday morning and you're like, I'm not going to do, and you're sitting there with your coffee, you can pop on and either have a, whatever, something done to yourself, or try practicing on somebody else. Alan will be available, but probably mostly Alan. Sometimes, one of us will be sort of monitoring the room, but we don't want to commit ourselves to this like every Saturday. So what we're going to do is we will always open the room. The room will always be there. Mostly, if I know Alan, he's going to be there, but if we decide that if we have some family event, or if there's some, something that we have to go to, what we'll do is we'll make sure that Alan's like phone number is there. And we would just say, if Alan isn't in there in the room and you can't get a hold of him and you want him to pop in for a suggestion or whatever, just text him, and then we'll be available and we'll pop in and get into the room.
Hey, if stuff comes up for you, so you're going through your week and then something comes up, man, it's a great place. That Saturday morning group, just get with a partner, clear it, move on, right? It's helping meeting your evidence criteria. It's helping somebody else practice their tools and techniques and meeting their evidence criteria. And what we end up building is a better, stronger community of practitioners.
Yeah. And what we'll do is we'll create a Facebook that is exclusive. I know that there's so many groups going on, and I don't want to add another one. I wouldn't mind some feedback in terms of like whether the PACE group or I don't know where to put it, but so if you do say on a, you decide that you'd really like to run the trauma model on somebody, or trauma or phobia, and you can just put it out there during the week and say, hey, listen, I'd really like to practice this. Is there anyone who'd be willing to be a subject for me to do this with? And then if one of you sees it, you can show up and do it. I think it would be
called the page. I think she already sent out an invite, but I think the it's going to be called the tool room or something cute like that, right?
Yeah.
The mechanic, Charles Bronson in The Mechanic.
Yeah, we won't ask you to tell us ahead of time. You can tell us ahead of time, but we won't ask you to, because we don't want to tie anybody to anything, right? So if you happen to show up on a Saturday, if you're the only one that shows up, or if we have an odd number or something, we'll work it out. We've got lots of people, so we could always give a heads up to somebody to come in. You could practice on Alan, but we'll figure it out. We'll make sure you get opportunities to practice this stuff. Yeah, so we'll start this Saturday, right?
Yep.
Yeah, so 10 o'clock this Saturday, and we'll make sure everybody gets in here. Sue.
10 o'clock. I said 9 o'clock till 11.
Oh,
Now, can I just offer something to Simone? Can I?
Yeah.
Okay, so Simone, I did send you, because I do have your email, but I sent you the acupressure points to help with the gag reflex, which are on the ear. So there are 2 points, which if you activate that with your client, it will help to stop all the gagging. So you can work with that, but it's part of the, the vagus nerve and the 9th cranial nerve that comes out of your head, that really this ventral part of that polyvagal nerve really can be an overdrive for people and cause them to be, their sympathetic nervous system is in overdrive, and they're just very sympathetic. So you could be looking to see if all their stresses are cumulative and how much stress they're experiencing physiologically could be adding to that gag reflex. And that could get to that point where it's revving up, upregulated to that point where, maybe they're not there yet, but they can crash and they can go into the dorsal aspect of the polyvagal nerve. And that's when you freeze. That is when you absolutely play dead. And you can't move, and you think you feel bad because you think you should be able to move, and you have all this guilt and shame that I should have done something, but they're not there yet. They're over here and they're up and they're like, yeah. So that little tidbit will help a little bit. But
I have a question. Can you do that yourself?
Yeah, so there's actually anybody can do it. And I will, Tara, I'll just send you that little link with the picture. But one of the things you can do just as a easy thing is if you just as a test, turn your head side to side and feel for tension in your neck, right?
Yeah.
For how tight that feels. And then you take your fingers and you come up to the top, come in close, come up to the top of your ears. You're going to pull your ears like Dumbo and uncurl them. And you're going to do that all the way down the earlobe. Because you have all those every acupressure point on your body is replicated in the ear, the hands, and the feet. And I'm going to come up again, and I do dumbbell ears, and I'm pulling my ears and my
How
ear.
much pressure are you using, Susan?
Pardon? How much pressure? It's comfortably uncomfortable. Your ears can turn all red, and you might find points. And as I pull out the dumbbell ears, then when I sit there again.
This is being recorded, by the way. I've got all you guys doing dumbbell ears.
Now, when I turn my head,
Yeah.
it should feel looser.
Yeah.
It's going to feel like, oh, all that friggin' tension that I was holding in my neck muscles just because they're nervous or whatever, right? Some people just live with their shoulders here, or they're having some kind of tension here. You just can release that by, activating those acupressure points and releasing the fascia that all stimulates through here. So it's excellent. That's just one of those little techniques. People do it and they're like, wow, I feel better. That's amazing.
Susan, you'll find it interesting. She's a craniosacral therapist. She does osteopathy, and she's a registered massage therapist. And she's having trouble with this. I don't think she's linked potentially that vagus nerve. So I could do some vagus nerve work too, right? So
Interesting.
yeah. So thank you. We need to have a chat, Susan.
Well, I was just going to say, Alan, do we have Sue on our list to be one of our Tuesday night NLP connected to another discipline?
I said yes 4 times now, Tara.
Oh, I did not hear you. Perfect. Do we know when?
Thanks, Susan.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem.
Susan, what area are you in?
What area am I in? I'm in mind and body movement.
No. I mean the location. Where are you?
Oh, I'm in Guelph.
Oh, well, okay.
Yeah.
Prior to COVID, I was going to her Pilates classes.
Yeah.
Susan's brilliant.
Yes.
No, I'm not.
Yes, she is.
I'm just I am a product of the life I've lived.
We are.
Trying to help myself.
Thank you.
Okay, other questions? Other questions? Hey, Michael, how are you?
I'm doing all right. How are you doing?
Michael and his brother Dan are here tonight.
I was just going to say, who's his brother from another mother?
Oh, yeah.
You're spelling the name wrong, though, dude.
That's what he said. Yeah, too much fun. Too much fun. Any other questions, you guys, about IRs, interpreting them, using them, doing anything, or any client questions? Any questions you want to ask? Put something on the table. Let's talk. A lot of bright minds here. Kate.
I have a client. She has overwhelming guilt and a lot of traumas, and she cannot see herself in the future. She cannot even see the goal, the future goal. And so what I did, we just clean up big fives and clean up some limiting decisions. And I sent her off with the homework. And she did only 2 days of homework instead of 6. And I'm canceling the tomorrow session. And the question is, taking into account her condition, like she is really in a bad state. Do I do the right thing, saying like canceling it? Like what I said her is, do your homework 6 days in a row. Give me your result. It's really not a big deal. It's to do my best card and to write down some new beliefs, like 10 minutes of work every day. But she's not doing it consistently.
Well, you know, my stance is that we don't want to be an enabler, right?
Right.
In somebody's life. However, having said that, I think the conversation about, she did do the process of not doing her tasks. So what was she doing? And was there a secondary gain in not doing them? I would at least investigate that so you understand what was the purpose of not doing it. Because every behavior has a higher purpose. Stay with that presupposition of NLP. She's doing the best she can with the resources she has, and investigate it. If it was just I'm not doing it, then you have to assess, she might not even want to be a client, right? It's a bigger conversation about she didn't do her homework. There's probably secondary gain. There's probably some reasons. I wouldn't start doing the work of the session. I would investigate what stopped her from doing that very simple task, because this is the first step in moving forward, right? And maybe something you clear in step 2 or step 3 will allow her to do her tasks, right?
There was a lot of reason that she mentioned. Somebody died from, like, the neighbor died. She helped the neighbor.
Yeah.
There was tons of reasons why.
No, I'm not talking about external. I'm talking internal. What was the secondary gain in not doing that homework?
Okay, so
I'd be
instead of the session, I investigate this one quickly.
Yeah.
And okay.
Yeah. Susan, my ears are on fire. What'd you do to me? Literally, they're just like red hot right now.
I know. I woke them up.
There you go. Cool. Michael, you had a question?
Yeah, so I was coaching someone, just a regular coaching, not NLP stuff.
Poor client.
What's that?
Poor client. They weren't getting NLP, Michael.
Bored. They were completely bored. Like, I don't know why he's even there. No, he was actually, we were making some interesting progress, and I did try, one little thing that I learned a long time ago, which is, you have a problem, trying to let something go. You find a pen or whatever, you say, this is your problem, and you actually physically let it go, right? I've used that on a couple of people, and it's worked. He did it, and he's like, yeah, I'm sorry to tell you, Mike, but that NLP stuff doesn't really work on me. Other people have tried, but it just doesn't work. And I'm like, I'm going to take that as a challenge. So I am actually enrolled, or going to soon to be enrolled in PACE coming up in March. And I'm looking forward to that. And I actually told him that I'd like to, because our sessions are going to come to an end soon, but when I'm done with this, I want to set up another session with him. And he was open to that. But yeah, as a neophyte, as a fledgling, stumbling around quasi non-NLPer, and having just graduated from your amazingly awesome PACE program, I'm just kind of wondering, for someone who already identifies as NLP doesn't work on me and other people have tried, what would be your pre-advice before I even go through all of this to approach him when I do meet with him again?
Well, think about what he's saying to you right out of the chute. He's hiring you to be his coach. He's saying what you do doesn't work. I mean, like, he's really out to prove that his problem's significant enough that, probably if he was with a CBT person, he'd tell them the CBT doesn't work, or EMDR, or whatever the alphabet soup is of the day. So I think you're right. You're up for the challenge, right? How specifically does he know that NLP doesn't work? Which part of NLP? I'm being rhetorical here. What part of NLP specifically didn't work? And with the body of knowledge of NLP, you want to numb his mind, Michael. Say, well, cool. I'm interested in that because NLP comes from Erickson, Satir, Bates, and Fritz Perls. When you look what they're educated by, that's the whole body of knowledge of psychology, literally. So are you saying that nothing in psychology will help you work? Because literally NLP techniques, they're not neuroscience, they're not science at all. They're the replication of techniques by some of the greatest clinicians of all time, whose education is informed by almost all of psychology. So what is he really saying? And he doesn't have enough information to say it. I would take that client on willingly and happily. It's not the droids he wants, right?
May I make a comment on that?
Yeah. Who's that?
Lindy.
Yeah.
So I'm presently taking a master's in clinical counseling as a crazy person. And and I have been fascinated how I'm reading my textbook, which is called The Family Therapy Concepts and Methods. And it's so fantastic how I'm seeing the steps in PACE from these therapies that I'm learning. Specific things like, accept the exception question, or the strategy of the strategy elicitation, or even one of the questions in asked is, what would happen if the problem wasn't there? How would you see it? Like, these are literal things found in these, therapies that are very common and very used. And what you're saying, Alan, it goes back to the basics of these people who created this psychology. So I'm pretty excited about the fact that I'm reading my text and I'm just seeing the exact thing that I've learned in the NLP work and the PACE work.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. You'll see lots that isn't there too. You'll run into both of it, right? You'll run into a whole bunch that is right matched up. That's, been aggregated and pulled out and used really well. And then you'll see all sorts of stuff that just flies in the face of NLP. And you'll have such an interesting time working that out, right? Because it's not to say that you won't use some of it and all that kind of stuff, but you will see stuff that is also very narrative based, right? Yeah. So you'll see a lot of narrative based stuff, and then it'll be interesting to see the contrast. Certainly we have people who do, who are really highly trained counselors. And, at the end of the day, I will say that the ones that are, that I know to be very good counselors, very good, MSWs, very good counselors, and are also very good NLP practitioners, they'll tell you that when their client is really seeking change, that what they really want to do is have change, they bring out all their NLP skills. And they really end up just kind of using NLP skills and timeline, all that stuff. When they have a client who isn't necessarily seeking change so much as they really need to be validated, they really need to be told that they're not crazy, that they have a right to be heard, and that their feelings are valid, that it's okay to, if they need that kind of validation and that's what they need, then they bring out their counseling skills. And it's really fantastic to have a whole set of skills that allow you to get into that conversation with somebody who really needs to be heard in that moment. And that's what they're hiring you to do. That's what they're there to do. They're not quite ready for change yet or asking for change, but they need to be heard. And that's very therapeutic as well, right? So it really gives you, a big, wide choice. Awesome.
Can I circle back to Michael? Anybody who is resistant to change, there's almost always secondary gain in staying stuck, right? And so I would really be interested, much like Kate, the advice to Kate, what is the secondary gain in coming out and saying that NLP thing doesn't work on me? We have a brother-in-law who smokes a lot, Tara and I, and he went to a hypnosis clinic to get rid of his smoking. And he said, well, hypnosis doesn't work on me. No, he didn't want to give up the smoking is the issue.
But he went with his father, and his father went to the hypnosis session, gave up smoking. He was a 50-year smoker, gave up smoking, has not smoked a cigarette again after that hypnosis session. And my brother-in-law went with him, and it, that doesn't work on me. That stuff doesn't work on me. Even witnessing his father, but it's interesting.
Yeah, during COVID, he's unemployed. So to keep his smoking habit, he now drives to 6 Nations and buys First Nation cigarettes, right? Because they're 1/4 of the cost. That's how much he wants to smoke. He'll drive 2 hours to buy his cigarettes. So yeah, hypnosis didn't work for him. No, I don't think he wanted to change actually. So secondary gain. Other questions?
That brings up an interesting, follow-on question then. So you have a client, they come to you, they purport to want to change. So you do all sorts of magic, and there's a lot of different kinds of magic on this call here, right? And you discover that, like your brother-in-law, this particular person really truly doesn't want to change. They come to you thinking they want to change, but then you get down to it and you realize that they don't. Where do you go from there as the coach? Do you just say, I can't help you, come back when you really want to do change? Or do you try? Yeah. Okay. So you don't try to go underneath that. Okay.
No, if they've really demonstrated that they are just there to prove that they are trying everything and nothing's going to help them and nothing's going to change them, and you're just like in their list of people that are going to demonstrate how difficult and unchangeable their problem is, then they're going to do that. I mean, they're going to do that no matter how talented and gifted and everything else you are, right? So, you specifically say, I've done everything that I can do, and my belief right now is that you don't want this change, and so I would be happy to work with you when you do, and please come back. People don't often make don't do that so much when they're paying $2,000 or $3,000. Truly. I mean, that's one of the things around, we all the time, we talk to people about, like, initially you want to do stuff for free, and sometimes people are so invested in change that you will discount, or you'll do pro bonos, or you'll do whatever. But the reason you really don't want to start off your career by doing a whole bunch of free work with like friends or all that kind of stuff is that you don't want to start working with people who don't really want the change, right? It's hard on the confidence. Whereas when people are coming to you as a paying client and they know what you do, usually they want change. You won't run into a lot of that.
Our mentors, Adriana and Tad James, use a thing called an ordeal. So the client you get into that thing, you give them a task that is really tough for them, an ordeal, literally, and 7 to 10 days to test whether they really want the change. If you're willing to do this for the next 7 days, I'll continue working with you. But if you're not prepared to do that, then no. And that just puts them up against it. It's you're there for them, and the task that you give them is beneficial. It gives you feedback about them. It gives them it'll be enlightening or educational for them, but it's an ordeal. It puts them right up against their stuff for 7 or 10 days, right? And they teach that as a technique. They also teach that if you're the 6th, 7th, or 8th clinician to work with a particular client, if your new client has already been through 6, 7, or 8 other clinicians, that's sort of a red flag. And before they would work with that kind of client, they would give them an ordeal just to make sure that the person wants to change. Tara had a client early in our NLP coaching business that she wasn't paying for herself, a family member paid for, and I think Tara was the 7th or 8th clinician to work on this problem, well within our scope of practice. But at the end of the day, the client had some very, very highly evolved skills to the point where, she just started, she was out to prove that her problem was so special it couldn't be fixed. Right? And very highly evolved, very, very highly evolved. So
usually when you feel as though you are trying to motivate your client, you know that something's going wrong, right? Your client needs to be motivated toward their own change, and then you need to be doing the tricky, good work of guiding them through that. But when you're actually, as the practitioner, when you're trying to like generate motivation for them to move toward change, you're exhausting yourself. And if they don't have that motivation, it's really how I frequently would get in situations where I realize I'm spending half my energy as a coach just trying to motivate them to move toward the change that they initially said they wanted, right? That's not my job. My job is to help them get it, not to motivate them to want it. So check in with yourself lots on that. And if you feel like you're overdoing it, then let them go and come back. And we've had good success. I've had some people who've initially the first time they've worked with me or I'll have blown out or decided to stop or they just aren't, they aren't prepared to do the change, and then they'll leave and then they'll come back 6 months later, a year later, or 2 years later, and then they'll get the change, right? And then everything that didn't work does work. I literally just had a conversation with a woman today that started with me a year ago. She was right smack in the middle of an ugly divorce, and she thought she wanted to heal, but she did about 3 sessions with me, and then she said, "You know what? I don't think she said anything to me. She just stopped showing up." And I just met with her. I spent an hour with her today, and she said, "Listen, I couldn't have done it a year ago, or it just, too much." And now. And it was just night and day. She's like a different woman today. And she's now saying, okay, you know what? And she's being, she's like, I'll pay you again. I'm not expecting you to take, and let's start again. Now I'm ready. And I believe she will this time. I believe that she will absolutely do the work.
the other thing that so many people forget, I told you guys last week, I did that Tony Robbins 5-day program, and I wanted to see how Tony was dealing with technology and how his people were responding. But I think one of the things that people overlook is that change requires change. Change requires massive change, in fact. John C. Newman says that if you want to change your life, change something you do every day. Radically change something you do every day if you want to have change in your life. And so often the best place to create change is in the morning, right? So we create new morning routines, new pattern interrupts. And so often our clients would come for change, and with the tools we have, we make massive transformations in their emotional, energetic state. They feel the change, right? They feel it energetically. But then they don't realize, even though we're really clear with the PACE protocol that, we're going to work with you for 12 hours over the next 10 weeks, but that's 1,680 hours. So you're on your own for 1,668 hours. So you have to enforce, you have to take massive action. You have to focus on you want. You have to focus on your new boundaries, your new beliefs, and your new behaviors daily. You have to do this stuff daily. And I think people miss that part. It'd be like getting a gym membership and wanting to get ripped up. And on the first couple workouts, you feel all the endorphins flowing, you have muscle tension, and then that's it. Then you don't go back to the gym. Well, you guys all know we don't get any change, right? And so, I've been saying change takes change. And so people look at me like I'm crazy, but it's the truth. Change takes a lot of change. You've got to change something. You've got to do it every day for like 70 or 90 days so it becomes new habits, and then notice the change. Talk to Tara about her running career. When she started running last May, she couldn't run. She wasn't a runner. 100 meters, 200 meters, then 500 meters. Then she ran a 15-day program over Christmas. Some of you may have participated with her online. On the 15th day in a blizzard, she ran 15K. Had you told her in May of last year that she could run 15K, neither her body nor her mind nor any part of her would have bought into that mythology. And here in a blizzard, between Christmas and New Year, she pushes out and runs 15 kilometers in a snowstorm, right? Why? Because change takes change. She went out dedicated and ran 3 to 5 days every week since May, right? So yeah, so that's an interesting client, Michael. I'd like to keep apprised of how you're doing with that one. That's a great one. Other questions? Anybody else? It's getting late. It's getting into the wee hours. No, you guys are a quiet lot. Lee.
Yep, I have a question. So I've got a client who we've just done the big 5, and then there was a number of other emotions that we let go of, and one of them that came up was anxiety. So I let go of anxiety, but I know that this is one big issue that she has. And after talking about this, she does have phobias from the anxiety. She's created phobias. So we were able to let it go in position 3 and 4, but future pace, past and future, there was still anxiety there.
Yeah. And
that makes sense relative to.
No, it doesn't make sense. The test in the past is, can you remember any past event in the past where you used to be able to feel that old emotion? Go back and notice you can feel it. I'm going to say that in my clients who said, yeah, I can still feel it, when I ask them, can you feel it, or are you seeing the situation you used to feel it in?
Yes, okay.
19 out of 20 are visualizing the situation they're feeling. They're not feeling anxious. They're sitting there across the chair from me.
Okay.
They're calm as a cucumber. Can you remember any event in the past where you used to be able to feel that old emotion? Go back and notice if you can feel it. Yeah, I can feel it. No, they're not anxious. They're sitting there calm as a cucumber. And then when you go out so that's my first, and then you take them out in the future, right? Go out into the future to some unspecified time in the future, which if it had happened in the past, you would have felt inappropriate and unwarranted anxiety. Notice if you can find that old emotion in the future now, or you may find you cannot. And they say, yeah, I can find it. Okay, I would investigate it. What is it about? What is it around? Because sure enough, if they're finding it in the future, it's going to be linked. Some trigger for that future is all the way in their back. Yeah, I'm going to meet with my father who I haven't seen for 2 years or 3 years or 52 years, right? And I'm all anxious in the future. Okay, now you know that there's something to be cleared back there, right? Okay. So no, when they clear wholesale. They right? And again, it's also like in position 4. Often people say, go down in position 4, looking through your own eyes, check on the emotion. Is it there, or did it disappear now? No, it's still there. Okay, are you seeing the context that it was in? Or are you actually experiencing it? Is it there? Oh no, I see. Okay. Or the one client I had recently, they said, no, the anger is still there. I said, where is it? And they point, they're in position 4 down in the event. They pointed it and the anger was on their mother. Oh, I said, that's your mother's anger. Are you feeling any anger? No. So sometimes you have to just, drill in a couple layers to get it.
That's really helpful because she wanted to describe in great detail what had happened before. So that makes sense that she's seeing that as opposed to actually feeling it, because yeah, she's fine. She just perceives that she doesn't believe that she can actually get rid of this anxiety.
So that's a belief now, right? She doesn't, that's separate from the anxiety. She has a belief that she can't get rid of the anxiety. Where were you when you decided you couldn't let go of your anxiety? I've met people when you talk, they're anxious. Well, anxiety is in my family. My grandmother was anxious. My mother was anxious, and I'm anxious. Okay, so where were you when you were deciding you couldn't let go of your anxiety? Well, and they're going to give you the root cause, and you're going to clear it as a decision as well. And then, right, there's about clearing the emotion, and then there's the decision about being able to let go of the emotions.
Okay.
I was born an angry person. I've always been angry. No, you weren't.
Yeah, and that's what I said to her too, right? I said, you didn't come out of the womb anxious, right? And
very much. That's my favorite line. You didn't come out of the womb anxious. Trust me.
Okay. Now, the other thing I want to ask about, she's part of the homework with doing peripheral vision for her. She's really struggled with doing peripheral vision. And because she has the anxiety, she talked about that if she does the peripheral vision, and I think she hasn't done it enough yet, but she doesn't want to anchor after, because she said, if I feel anxious, then I don't want to anchor in anxiousness.
So this is so cool. This is so cool. Think about peripheral vision. When you do it, when you actually enter into it, your respiration slows down, your heart rate slows down, you're actually stimulating your parasympathetic nervous system. It's hard to imagine. So my question is, what is she anxious about? She's not anxious about the peripheral vision. She's anxious about something else. Maybe, will this last? Can I do this? Am I doing it right? So many people, we live in this world where we've been trained, we get rewarded for being right, for being smart, right, and fast. And when we're, it only takes a couple times in the right environment where you're not smart, right, and fast, where you're not the smartest, right, or fast, you start believing that you can't learn this way or that way, And when we all came out of the womb, I'm going to tell you guys something, all right? Here's the deal. And I've got Dan's a hardcore researcher, so he'll call my bullshit on this one really fast. All of us, how many people are we here? We're 15 people online. The amount of time it took us to learn how to walk, these 15 people on here, from the first moment where we first pulled ourselves up on our feet to the first successful 2 steps where we stood and looked around, the difference in the time, not what month we started, but the actual act of when I stood up and I took my first 2 steps successfully and stood, and yours are going to be within nanoseconds. So we all learn equally well. The 3 biggest things you learn how to do is mobility, language, and social cues. And you learn all of that before you're 2 years old. So anybody who tells me I can't learn, I do learn, I do, well, okay. I want to know who told you that. When Tara and I witnessed our boy, our middle child, when he was in grade 1, told by a teacher that he made bad decisions. He came home, he was gutted. Yeah, look at Michael's eyes. He came home, he was gutted. He could barely talk. Mika, what's going on? I make bad decisions. Well, the teacher, who is an immigrant to Canada, English second language, with 30 little Canadian kids who she's had to put in snowsuits for the 3rd time of the day. And my son's ethereal, like he doesn't even think we're his parents. He thinks he's the son of a ninja and we're just raising him. So he's in another world. He's chatting. He's talking about, what he can do as a ninja. And she walks up to him. She's frustrated. She said, Mika, you make bad decisions. Well, you guys know it's in grade 1, his reticular activating system is informed. He's unconscious. He's in theta. That message went right into the core. Unchecked, that would have become a belief. Imagine at 25, he wouldn't have been able to decide what to do for a living, who to date, what school to go to, nothing, because guess what? I make bad decisions. You don't make bad decisions. The kid's brilliant. I'm teaching him chess right now. It's almost time to quit. I don't win. I can't win anymore, right? He makes brilliant decisions. But Tara and I, because we know NLP, for 2 years after that, Mika, how did you make that decision? That was a good decision, right? We reversed it. So when I hear those things, I'm anxious about doing peripheral vision. That's a person I think who's had a really tough, me personally. Now I'm jumping to the island of conclusion. I'm going to look for a lot of shit that was installed in that woman before she was 7.
Mhm.
I'm going to go hard in there and look in there, because peripheral vision is a calming technique. She can't be anxious about peripheral vision. When you do it right, you know, your vagus nerve floods up. And so she's got to be anxious about not doing it right, not doing it long enough, not getting the results she wants. She's anxious about anchoring. Woo! Yeah, that's a person who she's going to get so much benefit from you, Lee, so much.
I'm thrilled working with her. It's been phenomenal so far. And now she didn't, for example, just relative to homework, she has been doing her tasking, and yet, you know, the thing she's, like I said, struggled in doing the peripheral vision, but certain days she hasn't texted me to say she's done it, which is what our agreement was. And how do you, with, like, I struggle in the, how am I best, yeah, not wanting to, again, like, I know she's doing it, and yet she's not always telling me that she's doing it.
Again,
So,
I would investigate the secondary game.
okay.
Yeah. What, you know, is there a purpose for not doing the homework? Yes or no? What is it? It's X. It's Y, right? X is not doing the homework. Y is the purpose of it. X equals Y. And then you're just going to do a Viktor Frankl paradoxical intervention on that. X cannot equal Y.
But I think she's often doing it. She's maybe not doing the number of like 10 in the peripheral.
Not doing one part of it. She's not texting it to you. So is there a purpose for not texting?
Right. Okay. Got it. Okay.
Whatever the not doing part is there a purpose for not doing that?
Okay. Got it. Okay. Thank you.
No worries. Hello, Lindy.
Hello. When you have your follow-up a month later and it speaks about firing the trigger,
Yeah.
how do you do that? How do you fire the trigger?
My wife just sent me a private text here, tells me I have to find new stories. Okay, but my best stories are the only ones I use. Okay, so here goes. I'm going to tell a story I've told before. I had a client who had her husband had been adulterous with a woman who drove a silvery gold Toyota 4Runner. And so whenever she saw that silvery gold 4Runner, she'd lose her mind. She was a risk to herself and her family. Her husband also took his girlfriend to a warm country where there were palm trees. And when this woman saw pictures of palm trees or a real palm tree, she lost her shit, to say it gently. She was heavily traumatized by it. So when the breakthrough was finished at step 6A, I nefariously went to a travel agency and got 3 brochures and said, I know you've traveled before. Which of these 3 locations would you go to if you're going to a vacation? I knew she had gone to one of them. 2 of them had palm trees on the cover. She took one, she said, I would never go there. I heard bad things. She looked at the other 2 and said, either of these would be okay. So I fired the trigger. I handed her a picture of a palm tree and it had no impact on her. That's one way to fire the trigger. I also did it with her. I bought car brochures. I said, Tara and I thinking about buying a new SUVs. And I had 3 pictures. I had a Honda Pilot, I had a Dodge, and I had a Toyota brochure. I said, which one, you're driving a Honda Pilot, which one of these would you drive? She looked at me, the Toyota 4Runner never even fazed her. Okay, I fired the trigger. I showed her the actual visual stimulus that makes her crazy. The other thing you can do is just ask them. Ask them, okay, imagine. So some people are triggered by the tonality of people's voices, right? So you could just ask them, So imagine a time you're in a conversation with a person and now you hear that tone in their voice. How do you react? And calibrate, right? Their verbal description of how they react and their nonverbal have to be congruent, right? And you've been with them now for 11 hours. You best have a good sensory acuity and to judge them, to calibrate. We call that calibration, right? And so, yeah, that's how you trigger it, right? That's how you trigger it. And of course, you've been future pacing, right? So you're future pacing the new behavior. So once they say, no, nothing happens. So we'll go into the future when you actually meet that person with that tonality. How do you react in the future? And they say, no, I'm okay, I'm calm. Then we anchor it, right? Well, I tested it. Does that make sense, Lindy? Does that answer your question?
Yeah, because the examples you gave before were visual. So this person reacted to swift words being fired at him. So yeah. Thanks.
Tara had a client whose trigger was her boss. She thought her boss hated her and was mean to her and all these things. Every time she came into work, she saw his car and she'd start getting anxious. She'd have this massive anxiety attacks. And so after Tara did the work, Tara in the check-in, Tara said, so when you walk by your boss's car, what does it make you feel? She said, well, I don't know. I don't notice it. I don't think he's driving it to work as much anymore. Well, her boss was still at work every day. The trigger had no impact, right? So just it was the delete filter was now deleting the car. Think about the delete, distortion, and generalization. When the trigger is no longer a trigger, the delete filter just deletes that tone. When the trigger is still a trigger, that's one of the tones that the delete filter lets through.